So the topic of my talk today is collaboration, integrated testing, and safety assessment. And I wanted to combine a little bit of a history of pointing out some of the principles that OpenTox has promoted and how that's now evolving in various ways to projects like you see on either side of me, OpenRiskNet, NanoCommons, and some of the kinds of next generation applications we're building today. And when Nick Quirk mentioned this morning, he felt like a pop singer holding this mic like this. It reminded me of David Bowie, and so I put one quote on: "Tomorrow belongs to those who can hear it coming." And I think often OpenTox has been like that, and I hope I give some ideas of some of the new adventures that we'll have. I feel like we're not quite ready for the final performance of these Stardust. OpenTox keeps changing, and so there's still people who've been with us from the start. There's new people joining us. It's definitely evolving. And even if we're not always sure of how we're going to get somewhere we want to get to, the present and the future certainly does not look boring, as David Bowie said. And he made it a feature of his career to move on and add new experiences to his performance, his art. So perhaps that's a thought to start with. It's also a real pleasure to be back here in Athens. Greece has been, I think, has had a big contribution to both the founding of OpenTox, the work of Harry and his group at NTUA in the early days, and now being continued on subsequent projects. And it was great to see one of his students, Andrea, showing a lot of new work just before lunch in this session. And I'm very happy to be back here, and hope I'll be back here again, because it's a very strong collaboration we have with the people doing great work here. OpenTox recognized from the early days that we do our knowledge work on our different islands, and that's just the way the world is going to be, and that geography is not going to change. And hence, what we needed is a community-based framework supporting predictive toxicology and safety assessments. If we could make it sustainable, I'll add that, then we have the potential to enhance the knowledge development, sharing, and access that we need. And that means bringing people, data, and resources together. And as we found out, that's, I think, a good vision, but a lot of hard work to get there, and that's what OpenTox is all about: vision and hard work. We set out, I think the most important first step we made was setting out a specification, a framework for how software could be specified, how the different components could be defined and put together based on the principles of semantic, knowledge, resource, interoperability. And those principles, again, I think are still very much with us today in practice. Again, a lot of challenge to make them work in practice. And when we're engineering applications, including collaborations involving integrated testing and assessment, we need to combine evidence from different in vitro and in silico sources across several partners, from labs like Ola showed earlier on in this session. Then we need to specify that in these application programming interfaces. And this was our first version, where we specified both the metadata and the data to be exchanged between different people, labs, and databases as written in software. And of course, this requires further development and evolution. Finally, the community will arrive at accepted standards for this. And the other thing we realized early, which has also proven to be not so easy to implement in practice is the need for a formal ontology describing the concepts, to have this resource interoperability, to have a common language so that we can actually combine different resources, to have a common understanding of the different metadata and data used by all community stakeholders across all their different areas of activities, including different geographies. And just as this sign points out, even a small difference in a language statement, even if we have this vocabulary, can give you a quite different significant change in meaning. Even when our languages are different, the actual social context, how we motivate communications, the engagement between different stakeholders, and helping to understand the rules of protocols that we are following is a crucial social activity that we need to support. And it's because we're tackling complex problems. It's not going to be achieved just by software or AI or computer specifications. It's complex problem solving. So the importance of having the social structure supported by resources and tools for collaborative work is really an essential aspect of how we strategize to develop OpenTox. eNanoMapper, I think, is a nice live example of OpenTox in practice in terms of creating a common language. And this effort, which was started from 14 to 17, is now being continued in various projects, including as a main goal of the Nano Commons, to put a longer time frame sustainability on such a knowledge goal, which needs a long period of time for a community to further develop. Once the initial ideas and framework and APIs and thoughts were put out, we had this nice example from Ola and Egon with BioClips, where they weren't partners on the project, but they took these ideas of interoperability and demonstrated them in a decision-making tool 2 years after we did the first prototyping demonstration in Berlin, and they got distributed federated resources of data and models working with their decision-making workbench that was being used at AstraZeneca. And as discussed before lunch, some later variations of this are now being evolved further. So these kinds of bringing information together into decision-making applications is something that industry really values, because they have to make decisions with a certain amount of time and money that they have. In the time we've been doing this work, certainly a lot of changes and advances have happened in programs. So if you look at the current EU Toxtra's flagship program, where we're supporting with this kind of knowledge infrastructure role, the research now, which has an applied goal as a public-private partnership initially within SURET, now maintained by this large program of activities across many labs, is case study driven, and by different kinds of case studies that really specify the needs of the different kinds of information we need to bring together to achieve a particular assessment purpose. And there's a strong input by industry into these case studies. So this is a way of trying to overcome the barriers we've seen in 3R's research, that a lot of research is carried out, but does not necessarily lead to fit-for-purpose tools that are adopted by industry. So there's a big chasm there to cross. And it's been interesting to see how how that evolution has been taking place, and also in programs, some of the ideas we've put forward and their implementation has now, I think, led to some good discussions and recognitions and conversations with international programs, not just in Europe, but also in Japan and America, where we're being asked to participate and provide our views on how this international collaboration can be achieved. So we for example, over the last couple of years have been increasingly developing community out in Asia in this aspect of international collaboration on open science. This was an example workshop we held out in Japan. And so OpenTox has been expanding recently in terms of local chapters and initiatives, internships in Europe and in America. We were presenting our vision at the National Academy of Sciences recently. There's a strong local chapter being formed in Research Triangle Park. A lot of engagement by researchers in America, but also in Asia, and there are chapters forming there. We've had some very good meetings and engagement in Japan and Korea, and I'm going out to China and India next month, where further chapters and activities are being planned. So it's an exciting time, I think, for how OpenTox is growing as a community. Then in practice in Japan, for example, there's a strong artificial intelligence program in safety research, and there we've teamed up, and the interoperability ideas of OpenTox and the socialization ideas of Garuda, we've brought them together to support research goals in Japan, including important high-quality databases in the area of toxicogenomics, like Roland pointed out, but they also have a strong interest in using all relevant quality data in their programs. And this is an example workflow that we put together based upon that collaboration, where we're able to have a reproducible workflow for Japanese toxicogenomics data, both in vitro and in vivo, and do the processing of that data into different analysis and visualization tools showing gene set perturbations, pathway analysis, and so forth. And that's a collaboration between us, say, here in Europe, and the people working with similar kinds of goals in Japan. So OpenRiskNet, which is now in its second year, is building this vision into a next generation OpenTox, if I can call it that, but extended to a broader goal of risk and safety assessment, and I think will be an important initiative towards this goal that we're discussing here of sustainable industrial infrastructure and ecosystems for safety assessment. So I think what we've seen is a lot of research projects develop some resources, a database for the purpose of a project, but what we really need in terms of a broader engineered sustainable architecture and infrastructure goes way beyond often what's possible on the project. So I think this kind of infrastructure development is really quite helpful. It also has an associate partner program that has been launched, and it's open to participation both on the partnering provider side and also on the customer side. So if you have a resource, you can make it more valuable by joining forces with us. The partners on the project will work with you to integrate your resource, so your resource can become more valuable by more users and help us achieve this expansion of the user base. And then the users in turn can obtain advantage from having access to more tools and more tools working together. And the tool development there is driven by a tiered risk assessment practice developed under programs like SURET and now EU Tox Risk, again with a strong input from industry on what's really needed in their workflows of safety assessment, so that if we build tools, it really can be used in the decision making they make, and this is tiered. So this is guiding the development in OpenRiskNet, which is quite different to I think the situation we're in when we started, where we often didn't have even this kind of, let alone this framework, not even maybe a use case very clear. And so within OpenRiskNet, we have not just use cases to guide the development, but a set of case studies that cover the needs of a tiered approach to safety assessment that include data curation and management, machine learning, predictive modeling, read-across, systems biology, metabolism prediction, AOP development, toxicogenomics, and toxicokinetics. So the infrastructure and the service development there is being developed and tested against this full range of case studies, and that I think will, it's a very challenging goal it's taking on, but provide good guidance to the developers to really match what they're developing against what's really needed and is going to be used in industry. Now, reproducibility is a new adventure challenge we're taking on within OpenTox, and I think the reason is it needs innovation. We want to, I think we're a good community to tackle the subcomponent of in silico reproducibility. It involves engagement with the regulatory science community, which is also an increasing activity that we're taking on, and where it's a very important topic. And it's going to need demonstrations, discussion, a community dialogue to really discuss, review, and again, over time, arrive at what sort of in silico practices do we need to achieve in silico reproducibility. And the challenge I've put out is I think it's a capability we don't currently have, but this community has the collective knowledge and skills to advance it. This topic we've discussed also not just within, recently within our OpenTox meetings, but also within the discussions of the regulatory science community, and we've defined initial areas in predictive modeling, integrated testing, and toxicogenomics to work on workflows with best practice and put it out to the community. And OpenTox should, I think, take a lead role in evaluating and improving those suggestions. So before this OpenTox meeting, we had a NanoCommons meeting. So it's a new project led by ESA that has just started, and I think reflects a lot of these principles applied to a very challenging area of assessing the safety of nanomaterials. And of course, as shown here, there are a lot of research projects, and NanoCommons is really going to try to bring the various kinds of resources from these different initiatives together into an integrating knowledge infrastructure driven by user needs and cases and solving problems for them. And this requires quite a complex organization to tackle the problem, how to bring everything together. And it's, I think, has a lot of promise. But obviously is, when you look at the picture here of all the different interactions and challenges it's taking on, it has the need for a lot of coordination, and must again tackle this foundation of how do we organize the data? Is it really described well enough? can we integrate it? Can we curate it? Can we actually use it in applications? So that'll be an important early impact area. And a related area that we're tackling is this topic within another project, ACE Nano. How do we describe the characterization of experiments when we have complex experiments? How do we describe the metadata, the protocols, the data sets in a way that allows us to really understand what researchers have done with their experiments? Can we integrate it or not? And how do we have reproducibility between evidence and labs? So using the inspiration of the view from the Korean chapter, this is a picture of, I think, the infrastructure that we're currently building. And the idea is, I think, to provide a table on which we can have diverse dishes in one setting, around which we can have good conversations and good outcomes. We don't have to necessarily integrate all those individual dishes and recipes into one dish. Or the Swiss view. As most of you probably know, I'm Irish, but I've settled in Switzerland, and we're starting a chapter there. And the Swiss are very practical, of course. So I hope they'll have a good input on how do we accommodate a herd of different stakeholders of different colors with practical solutions, both when we have consensus and also when we don't, which happens too. Cosmetics industry is an important industrial customer of these kinds of integrated testing and assessment solutions we're talking about, because by law they can no longer use animal tests. And so they have a strong interest in using these new methods. And under this ToxHU project, which Switzerland and Sweden are funding to help industrialize the research for use by such industries, we established a collaboration with Procter & Gamble. It started at Lady Alberet, a nice systems toxicology meeting in Switzerland, where we had a good conversation with the goal to industrialize their knowledge, all the work they've been doing in recent years, industrialize it and help develop the science into an integrated testing application that can be used in a practical setting by risk assessors in assessing the skin sensitization of cosmetic ingredients. So, so one aspect of that that we've embarked on, and the project's codenamed, Swiss codename Edelweiss, is to build a data infrastructure that reliably brings different sources of data together in an integrating interoperable data infrastructure. And the other aspect of the work has been building the application for bringing evidence together against the skin sensitization adverse outcome pathway. We're looking, in this case, it's a relatively well-defined AOP. It has 3 validated assays, and Joanna Jaworska at Procter & Gamble developed a very nice Bayesian network-based model for weighing the evidence. And we also incorporate in silico models, and some of our new work is extending that to include sources of omics and other kinds of data. So it's a platform for solving problems involving integrated testing and assessment. And another aspect of the goal is all of this science. If you read Joanna's papers, it's quite difficult even for scientists to understand and reproduce the work, because there's a lot of detail, a lot of different protocols, including in silico modeling, are required. What we try to do is put it into an application where a risk assessor, who's not necessarily that kind of computational scientist specialist, can evaluate with the compounds and the data they have and get a result. They need a prediction, an uncertainty, a confidence, and a report they can use in their work. They don't have 2 weeks to go off and understand all of this. They have a limited amount of time to get the work done. In this new market of reduced risk products, we've also been working, and you probably see, this is in a shop in Korea, these products are a huge growth market area and involve requirements for a lot of new safety assessment work. And we've been taking on the job of building the infrastructure for organizing the data sharing within this new industry. And the portal is called Intervals and has been released. And its goal is to share both preclinical and clinical inhalation toxicology data based on best practices in data management and open science. And the portal that looks like this is encouraging the sharing of protocols, results, and data sets supporting research in inhalation science and disease pathways. We've also incorporated in it the FAIR principles for data access and retrieval, so that visitors can both upload their data, get support in preparing their data, and also have access to data that's been added to the portal. And the platform should support this mechanistic investigation of tobacco-related diseases and relevant pathways, including evaluating the healthcare gains by smoking cessation or substituted use of traditional cigarettes by reduced risk products in terms of cessation absence. So this Intervals portal is now open for contributions, protocol sharing, addition of results, data uploading, and access to the uploaded information, so that the broader community, including regulatory scientists, can evaluate the evidence from this large new product area. So with that, I hope that gave some insight into some of the work we're doing, bringing the research closer to industrial applications. The progress that is contributing to, I think, the end goal of achieving this safer world by design of products, and the recognition that there's only so much any of us can do on our own, but by bringing different sources of evidence and capabilities together, supported by both collaboration and interoperability, we can tackle and make better progress in this area of integrated testing and assessment, where the reliable interoperability and integration of different kinds of heterogeneous evidence are needed to support this engineering of applications that industry can then use, and hopefully, if they're robust and transparent enough, will also be increasingly accepted by the regulators. So it doesn't look like, I think, to finish, that we've reached our Ziggy Stardust day, and certainly life's not going to be boring. There's a lot of very interesting work to do together in coming days, and I hope I gave you some inspiration and insight on how you can continue to work or join forces with us in this exciting adventure we're on. Thank you.